Now a Storm Team 2 special presentation, Lessons Learned.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Rob Fowler. The past several months have been difficult as we have and continue to face a situation none of us have ever encountered before. This pandemic may be new to all of us, but hurricanes certainly are not. We've been through our fair share.
This storm is no joke. The flooding is so serious along Ashley Avenue. I mean, we're just getting hammered around here.
Watch this map and pay attention to me right here, because this is when we think the potential for that surge will really start to come into play.
Day one after Hurricane Hugo, as the cleanup and the restorations of our home begin.
As another hurricane season begins, we look to the past to better prepare for the future. Over the next half hour, Storm Team 2 will take you through some of the previous storms to hit us with wind, rain, storm surge, and even tornadoes, drawing insights for these impacts to better understand what tropical systems can do. These are lessons learned. Let's begin with the storm most recent in our memory, Dorian. Dorian was the storm of the 2019 season, an absolute monster of a storm. It was the most powerful hurricane recorded in the open Atlantic, with maximum sustained winds of 185 miles per hour.
More frightening than its strength was its speed or lack thereof. Without any steering currents from the upper atmosphere, the Category 5 storm battered the Bahamas for a truly nightmarish 48 hours.
Buildings, roofs flying off.
Before mercifully crawling north. Sluggish storms like this aren't unheard of. Florence and Harvey also come to mind. According to NOAA meteorologist Jim Cosson, sluggish hurricanes may become the new norm.
We did a small piece of follow-up work that looked specifically at storms over the continental United States, and we found a significant slowdown of about 17%.
That number may seem insignificant, but it certainly is not.
On average, it's 17%, but reality is Dorian, or reality is Harvey, right? These are storms that are practically not moving. They're the ones that are responsible for a fair chunk of that 17%.
His research boils down to one statement. Slower, stronger, wetter hurricanes like Dorian are happening more often as the currents that drive these storms westward weaken. We should be prepared for impacts to possibly be drawn out for days, and in general, longer-lasting tropical systems. Two weeks would pass between Dorian's formation in the eastern Atlantic, August 24th, and landfall on the Outer Banks, September 6th. Much of that time was spent anxiously watching and waiting as this system begged for our attention for days on end. Uncertainty grew as conflicting forecast models didn't offer any concrete answers to where it would go. The longer you had to wait, the more antsy you got to seek out answers from any source. This problem has become worse as forecast models have become widely available to anyone. Information from a single weather model run can be taken out of context and shared on social media, where it spreads like wildfire. Help us combat misinformation throughout this season by following and sharing forecasts from sources you can trust. Be wary of posts that don't communicate the inherent uncertainty in all forecasts.
Scenarios, which I give equal weight to at the moment.
Which we illustrated to you in the days leading up to its impact.
In the end, Dorian slipped by just off our shore, a close call compared to another storm a few years earlier that could have done the same, but ended up becoming the biggest storm we've seen in nearly 30 years. That storm was Matthew. Here's meteorologist Josh Marthers.
Rob, it was clear early on that the storm would be something to watch, as it would either barely miss to our east or hit the South Carolina coast directly. Back in 2016, Low Country residents began preparing for the possibility, if not likelihood, of a direct strike, the most menacing track since Hurricane Hugo in 1989. Matthew promised to bring high winds, isolated tornadoes, and the most deadly of all threats, water. Matthew's storm surge washed across the coast as the storm moved north. with many communities experiencing surge heights of 3 to 5 feet above ground level. Charleston Harbor reached its highest water level since Hurricane Hugo. Structure failures and properties that had never flooded before were inundated. Widespread heavy rain only compounded issues. More than 10 inches of rain fell, causing widespread significant flooding across the Carolinas, which were just beginning to recover from the catastrophic flooding in October of 2015. 25 would die in North Carolina, 4 in South Carolina, all but 1 due to flooding. Of the deaths in North Carolina, over 3/4 occurred in vehicles, despite public warnings to stay put and avoid floodwaters. Historically, water, the combined threat of inland flooding and storm surge, is responsible for 90% of all hurricane deaths. Avoid becoming a statistic by following the simple rule: turn around, don't drown. The death toll, damage, and disruption to life for months brings up another important point. Category or classification doesn't always matter.
Everybody concentrates so much on these categories, but here's the statistic that we need to talk about. In the last decade, Category 1 storms have killed 175 people and caused $103 billion worth of damage. It is not about that category. It's about the impacts of whatever category, even if a tropical storm, and in some cases, no name. If there's impacts, that's what we need to prepare for. Although Matthew made landfall as a Category 1 hurricane, impacts for some were greater than what has been felt by storms with higher wind speeds. Remember, category and storm classification is wind speed dependent, and other possibly more significant impacts aren't considered. We've tried so hard at the Hurricane Center to separate those impacts from that category with a storm surge watch and warning, inundation mapping, better depictions of the rainfall, and I think we're doing a good job at that, but it's a constant reminder, category is only the wind. Discussions continue among leading experts in meteorology and social sciences to improve the communication of impact-based forecasts that are not necessarily focused on category alone. Look at the circulation impacts going all the way up into the mid-Atlantic states. This is a large hurricane. Water and wind typically are the main impacts of a hurricane, but time and time again, tornadoes have proven to be a real but sometimes overlooked threat in landfalling hurricanes. Let's head over to David for a look on why they occur.
Our severe weather outbreak this past April that produced over a dozen tornadoes was historic for both their power and their quantity. You see, tornadoes are fairly rare here in the Lowcountry, as National Weather Service meteorologist Ron Morales explains.
In a season or in a year, we might issue 150 to 250 severe thunderstorm warnings versus less than a dozen tornado warnings.
A good chunk of our tornadoes don't occur in spring, but rather autumn as hurricanes move on to land.
That's why that tornado warning is there.
We see this time and time again with tropical systems. In fact, it's rare for a hurricane to not produce tornadoes after landfall.
Be surprised if a tornado warning comes out shortly.
Okay, thanks, Josh.
The majority of these don't form in the eye wall, but in the intense outer bands that can extend over 200 miles away from the storm's center, usually in the front right quadrant or to the northeast of the hurricane's eye.
This sweet spot for hurricane development comes down to spin, or shear, at the surface. At the surface, we're battered with strong southeast winds as the storm's bands circulate counterclockwise. But higher up in the atmosphere, the wind comes at nearly the opposite direction. This vertical wind shear only increases after landfall as winds at the surface slow down due to friction over land, increasing that tornado threat. Spin-ups can happen quickly, so be alert and be ready to move to your established safe space.
Thankfully, these tornadoes are short-lived and generally weak compared to the springtime supercells like the Lowcountry experienced this year. So while tornadoes pose a much smaller and much more isolated risk compared to the wind and rain in tropical systems, they're still worth planning for, especially in tropical systems that crash into the Florida Panhandle and move north, placing us in that front right quadrant. This pattern with Irma in 2017 produced 4 tornadoes in the Charleston metro and 13 with Francis in 2004. Both of which weakened to tropical storms by the time they reached us.
And even the potential for isolated tornadoes coming in with these bands. But right now, this goes to show that you should be prepared for any system, even tropical storms, whether it's your first or 40th hurricane season. Well, it's time now to bring in our newest member of Storm Team 2, Megan James, just joining us here. We're so happy you're here, Megan, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, Rob, I'm thrilled to be here. Back in college, I actually took a graduate level tropical meteorology course, so I'm excited to put my knowledge to the test. And one thing is for certain, whether it's your first or you've been through so many hurricanes, we always have to be prepared for the next one at hand.
Don't let the last hurricane kill people again because they make their decisions based on what happened in the past and about what they might remember or misremember about their experience 30 years ago, or what they were told by their neighbors or their family or their friends. Every storm's unique, it has its own hazards. People have to take action on based on what's possible, not based on what their own experience is or what they've seen in their lifespan, because that's a pretty short period of time compared to what nature can do.
All right, Megan, as we mentioned, you have some experience, but tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you went to school, and I know you're happy to be here in the Low Country. I think the first thing you did is go to the ocean, which we'll be watching a lot this year.
Yes, we will be watching it so much because my whole entire life I have been landlocked. I've lived in Missouri, born and raised, and then I moved to Columbia for college. I went to the University of Missouri, and from there I did a year in Lexington, Kentucky, and now here we are on the coast. I'm excited to get out and go on a run. Maybe we can run together.
Let's do it. Outside of hurricane season or any hurricane threat, but
yes.
You mentioned that course you took in college. It's kind of different when you see it in the books and then you see it in real life. What is your feeling going into this season? A little nervous probably, I think we all are.
Nervous, but mostly excited because I know I have such a wonderful team to look up to and to learn from. And I think that we're just going to do such a great job getting through this season together and keeping people informed.
Oh, we're certainly happy to have you. Thanks, Megan. We look forward to working with you this season and seasons to come.
Same here.
Stay with us as we take a look at what lessons we learned from the storm that changed the Low Country forever, Hurricane Hugo. Welcome back. Hurricane Hugo truly was a once-a-generation storm. Nearly 30 years before Hugo was Gracie. And now just over 30 years since Hugo's devastation in 1989, we've been blessed to not see one like it arrive on our shores. What made Hugo different and more dangerous was its origin.
Anytime we see a storm of any kind forming in the far eastern Atlantic Ocean, we can't help but be concerned. Some of the worst hurricanes of all time have formed in a region off of the coast of Africa known as the Cape Verde, or sometimes called Cape Verde Islands. Hugo started as a cluster of storms in Africa, coming off of the coast, and then began the journey across the warm waters of the ocean. The reason these hurricanes have normally been looked at differently is, for the most part, there's no land to weaken these storms, just warm water to act as fuel to their fire.
There's the eye of the storm, very, very potent storm. And as
we started tracking Hugo very early on because of this reason, knowing this could be one of those Cape Verde storms. A quick note, just because a storm forms in this area does not mean it will make landfall here. But with early weather satellite data, we were able to see Hugo from its inception to its landing here in South Carolina. It was a long night spent with Hugo.
I was here at the National Weather Service office in North Charleston, keeping you updated on the storm using their radar. It was quite scary here. A couple of times it sounded like the roof was being pulled off, and many of us ran down this hallway to the bathroom for protection.
The direct impact was over by the following morning, but Hugo's wrath was deadliest after it had come and gone. Nearly all of the 26 deaths attributed to Hugo in South Carolina occurred after the storm, during the cleanup. These deaths are labeled indirect fatalities, as Michael Brennan from the NHC explains.
We have a lot of these so-called indirect fatalities where people survive the storm itself, but they die afterwards from electrocutions, carbon monoxide poisonings, medical issues.
Studies show that the number of indirect deaths is almost the same as the number of direct deaths with hurricanes. Hugo proved that sometimes the aftermath can be more deadly than landfall.
It's because in a lot of cases people are left in these very vulnerable situations where there may not be any power, there may not be any water, emergency or medical services, sometimes for weeks.
I need water, I need cold water, I need food, my baby need Pampers. We can't live here.
And so if you're asked to leave, there's a reason for that. It's so that you'll save your life, but also that you won't be there in this very vulnerable state after the storm.
Evacuation orders need to be taken seriously, especially now as our forecast models and accuracy improve.
Now that Hugo is come and gone, we look forward to a future of rebuilding, a future hopefully filled with more advancements in weather technology so we can continue to give you the advance warning needed to stay out of harm's way.
I said that with hope 30 years ago. Since then, there have been many jumps in hurricane forecasting. New and improved global weather models can now more accurately predict where a storm will go. Models have come a long way since then. 5-day forecasts today are as accurate as a 24-hour forecast back in 1980. While track forecasts have improved exponentially, intensity forecasts haven't advanced much and still prove to be difficult and complex today. As coastal populations expand, our hurricane forecast must continue to improve. Nearly 2 times as many people live in South Carolina's coastal counties now compared to 30 years ago, with more potentially in harm's way next time a monster storm arrives.
We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Lessons Learned. And now, of course, the question, Josh, we get asked most often is, what is the hurricane season going to look like? We've already had several storms already in the books. We've gotten off to a fast start. That doesn't always mean it's going to be a fast finish, but the forecast looking very active this year.
It does. And what I think we can say here, Rob, is that we're fairly confident this is going to be an active season. Probably going well into the teens, maybe close to 20 named storms. But it's how active will it be, and will those storms come close to the United States? You can have 20 named storms that never hit a piece of land, and it doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
Where do they go?
Yeah, I remember 1995, we had a number of storms, but most of those, if not all of those, stayed off in the ocean. But each and every one we had to watch very closely. So the numbers are there. What we can't predict is the landfall.
And in the mid-90s, you mentioned those active seasons where most of those stayed offshore. Then you go to 2004, 2005, which had similar numbers, but a lot of those storms came right toward the United States, and that changes the whole game.
Okay, so what goes into this? We know that we watch for La Nina, El Nino. We also watch for water temperatures. I know El Nino is a periodic warming of the waters that can change the upper level winds that inhibit tropical growth. We like that.
Yeah.
This year, it looks like that's not going to be the case.
It looks like we're at least going to be neutral, if not maybe going into a La Nina signal as we head toward the peak of this season, which would possibly give us more storms. It could actually turn this into a hyperactive season, not just an active season.
And now we're talking water temperatures running above normal. 80 degrees is kind of that threshold, if you will. These storms need that fuel, and 80 degrees is where the temperature is warm enough to really create the problems.
And the Gulf of Mexico is just through the roof as far as its temperature anomaly is concerned, which really has a lot of attention focused on those states too.
Well, the one thing we can promise you, Storm Team 2 will be with you all the way for each and every storm, and stay up to date and keep you updated on what's happening.
That's exactly right.
2020 hasn't pulled any punches. A global pandemic, violent tornadoes, unrest across the nation and right here in our own city. It's been draining, at times overwhelming. Unfortunately, this hurricane season looks to add on top of this. Forecasters are calling for an above-average number of storms, of which we've already seen several. As we head into the peak of this active season, we all need to seriously consider our mental health. Alan Stewart, a psychology and meteorology professor at the University of Georgia, explains how the trauma and stress from these events can add up.
It can be overwhelming, and the person can, manifest symptoms of depression or anxiety or traumatic stress. The body keeps score. The psyche remembers. So if there's a cumulative history of traumatic events that the person's lived through, and for all of us right now, we're getting a big kind of dose of that with COVID, come storm season, that extra layer of potential stress could result in really challenging times for people's mental health.
Understand that while the weather is out of your control, your preparedness is not. He recommends creating a hurricane kit and plan with your family. hopefully creating some peace of mind that we'll need in the coming months.
If adults are able to be sort of problem focused and look at what they can control and take the steps to prepare or to evacuate and can do so calmly, then the children will more likely follow suit. If we're confident and reassured and calm, then so will children be as well.
Take a moment tonight and download our 2020 Hurricane Ready Guide on our website, counton2.com. You can find it under the weather section called Tracking the Tropics. It has everything you need to guide you through the steps you need to take before, during, and after the storm. Count on us to give you the latest, most accurate information this hurricane season as we get through this the same way we've gotten through everything else, together. We'll be right back. Thank you for taking the time with us tonight as we guided you through the storms that you rode out along with us. While each storm is and will be different, it's our hope that the lessons we've learned can be used to better prepare for the next one to threaten us. From Dorian,
understanding that slower hurricanes are becoming more common and to be patient as they take their time to arrive.
To Matthew,
primarily preparing for the combined threat of storm surge and inland flooding, even in tropical storms and Category 1 hurricanes.
Whether it's your first
or 31st. Preparing the same for each, watching forecast trends closely.
And following evacuation orders as the storm's arrival is only the beginning.
Through it all, you can count on us.
From all of us at Storm Team 2, have a good night and a safe hurricane season.